Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chariwag, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on Sociology of Gender. Today we are going to discuss the module Gender and Education. In this module, we will deal with the interrelationship of education, gender and social development. We will also take a brief look at education as an important social institution. Further, drawing upon the various areas of work under sociology of education, we will also try to see how it is engaged with the whole idea of gender. Further, we will also look at the various theoretical frameworks to have an understanding of gender and education. Further, we will delve into the brief history of women's education in India, and we will end with the factors affecting women's education in India. In April 2016, in a popular Marathi newspaper named Sakal was a photo of a small girl, not more than 7 years, who was sitting at the doors of a classroom and was keenly listening to what was happening inside. She was in uniform, attending classes just like other students in her class. This is not to conclude that she was punished. The fact was, she who needed to be looked after had a younger sibling in her lap. She, like the million other girls in India, took care of the younger sibling in the family and at the same time was trying to attend school. Pivot, a small short film which won 2016 National Award, is also telling. It's a film about a small girl in rural India and how she makes to the school every day. The girl wakes up, sweeps, cleans, cooks, takes care of her grandmother, feeds her small brother, feeds the cattle, fetches water, prepares her brother for school, feeds her grandmother, then eats something, bathes, studies and then proceeds to school, which itself is a long walk. This photo and the film precisely describe the context of girls' education in India, both in rural and in urban areas. When India became independent in 1947, female literacy was only 8.6%. Firmly believing that education is a panacea for women's development and empowerment, efforts were directed towards girl education and education at large. These efforts definitely improved women's overall status. However, even after 7 decades of education of girls faces myriad challenges like lack of school readiness, less enrollment of girl child, high dropout rate, class, caste, regional disparities, inadequate educational facilities, patriarchal mindset of the society, quality issues, academic achievements and many others. There are increasingly studies that brings forth finer nuances of the relationship between gender and education and demonstrate that attention also needs to be paid on factors inside the school like curriculum design and textbook. Education being one of the most important social institutions affecting men and women differently. Rather, aspects of education like school readiness, access to education, retention, academic achievement, higher education and many other aspects of education depends for girls on the social location of family, caste, class, region and religion. Also, education does not have the same causes and consequences for boys and girls. This module seeks to understand the complex relationship between the social institution of education and women. This module also discusses how gender, that is social construction of men and women, remains a significant factor in every aspect of girls' education. It also discusses the brief history of girls' education in India. It further argues that if India has to improve the status of women, it has to empower them and educate them in true sense. Attention must also be given to how gender affects every aspect of education. Lastly, this module will also discuss how the changing context of globalization has effect on girls' education. Let us first begin by understanding the concept of social institution and education as a social institution. Education as a social institution. In sociology, an institution is a system of organizing social relationships which embodies certain common values and procedures and meets certain basic needs of society. They are structured processes through which people carry on their activities. Sumner defines institution as something which consists of a concept and a structure. Institutions have emerged as products of people living together, and earlier when people started living in groups, they developed certain patterns into their day-to-day life to meet their daily needs. Slowly, these patterns received social sanctions and eventually rules were established and these rules were codified into laws. These practices continues to develop and change. At the same time, institutions impose constraints on individuals. Education is one of the significant institutions in today's society. The word education has come from the word leisure and is referred to the people who had leisure to learn. Modern education, often considered as a product of industrialization and modernization, has changed the character of education from elite prerogative to that of the masses. Education is one of the important instruments of socialization through which norms and values of a society are instilled in the minds of the people. Sociology of Education in India, Literature Review. Sociology of education is a study of educational structures, processes, and practices from a sociological perspective. This means that the theories, methods, and appropriate sociological questions are used to better understand the relationship between educational institutions and society, both at the micro and the macro levels. The field has got a peculiar character because of its dual existence in both sociology and education. This dual existence is one source of tension between those who see the sociology of education as a pure science and those who see it as an applied field of study. Many scholars have argued that sociology of education has remained marginalized and had to struggle for prestige and recognition in the countries. After studying sociology and social philosophy for 35 years, Young has argued that sociology of education is triply marginalized. First, separated from the day-to-day concerns of much of the social life. Secondly, marginalized within faculties of education and education research institute, its principal institutional locations. And third, the study of education is itself marginalized within academia at large. In India, sociology of education emerged sometime around 1964 with the establishment of Education Commission. Thus, the field emerged primarily from policy imperatives rather than from within the parent discipline, and remains as a softer and marginalized discipline in sociology at large. Reflecting on her experience of 45 years in sociology of education, Suma Chitnis states that the failure to research on the ongoing realities in education and to enrich sociological concepts with insights from experience is a major shortcoming of the discipline. Sociology of education and its engagement with gender issues. Many themes of sociology of education in India has been examining caste, class inequalities in educational achievement, problems of minorities, SCs and STs, education and state, education and social change, social mobility, and educational organization and social system. Studies in education were classified under women's education theme for the first time in the fourth research of survey in education by the NCERT. Since then, this has been one of the most significant themes in sociology of education. Nambisan, in her review of research in sociology of school education in India, states that there has been a significant work in India on the education of the girl child, her socialization into patriarchal or patrifocal ideology, and the norms and values that influence her education and life chances. Regge, on the other hand, argues that feminist scholars have underlined the ways in which the educational system has taught the girls to lose through the gendered curriculum. According to her, for feminist sociology, the issue therefore is not limited to measuring educational achievements but to draw out issues of the hidden curriculum, of stereotypes and role models, and to everyday interaction in the educational system. Feminist educators see the curriculum and teaching methodologies as sites of struggle and as potential areas for change. Channana, in her study on Hindu female education and sexuality, argues that it is not possible to view women's education without reference to the social context, which is rooted in culture, religion, and in patriarchal family structure and ideology. Protection of female sexuality of women remains a crucial factor that influences their access and their journey through school. She observes that schools reproduce family socialization, especially gender socialization in the family. She argues that women remain passive actors in the process of schooling, do not question the patriarchal ideology, and do not transgress the social boundaries and work within the accepted system of values. Many studies demonstrate that sisters and brothers in the same families do not receive same education. At the same time, it is seen that girls are educated and are sent to college only to ensure that they get better grooms and better mothers, thus ensuring social status and mobility. In her study, Sisters and Brothers, Schooling, Family and Migration of one of the peasant family in Punjab village, Radhika Chopra underscores that schooling of the daughter was perceived as a means to secure future emigration of the younger son through the former's marriage into the diaspora. Meenakshi Gautam, in her exploratory study of women students at a university in Delhi, showed that while choosing subjects, father and gender played a very important role. Also, priority was given to the institution, to its location, and to the availability of an attached hostel rather than to the subject or discipline. Donner, in an article, Committed Mothers and Well-Adjusted Children, Privatization, Early Years Education and Motherhood in Calcutta, explores new definitions of good mothering among middle-class families in Calcutta. In her ethnographic study, she argues that preschool education has reshaped women's lives as daughter-in-laws and mothers of successful future white-collar workers. Like Dury, she also notes that in Calcutta, women's education is seen as a precondition for marriage and motherhood, as both these institutions need new set of parenting skills. Basi, in her study Gender in Schools, Observations from an Exploratory Study, studies primary section of a Kendra Vidyalaya in Delhi and explored gender relations within the school in terms of organizational practices inside and outside the classroom, teacher attitudes and expectations. According to her, gender code and hidden curriculum remains ingrained in the minds of the girls and prevent girls from crossing gender boundaries. She concludes that gender differentiation is very much a part of the everyday schooling experience of children from early years of education. However, Nambisan argues that in spite of increasing studies in the area of gender and education, the contextualization of gender relations within Indian classrooms is still a neglected area of research. The schools remain largely influenced by the gender norms prevalent in that particular society. Many studies demonstrate that education do not give equal educational opportunities to people of the marginalized communities. Rather, Velaskar argues that the emancipatory role of education in bringing about freedom, equality and social justice can perhaps be virtually dismissed. She points out that despite the negative nature of some changes, educational development in the context of Dalits has some positive effects, and it is this education that has enabled them to wrest power in social, cultural and political domain of life and erode some of the hegemonic belief system. In her study, Caste, Gender and Education, Dalit Girls' Access to Schooling in Maharashtra, examines to what extent the Dalit women have been able to go beyond the barriers of caste, class and gender in schools. She observes that there has been overall access in schooling for Dalit girls at all levels. However, she states that there is a sharp gender disparity in retention, particularly at the secondary level. Pike, in her study of Chhadi Lage Cham Cham Vidya Ei Gam Gam, the harder the sticks beats, the faster the flow of knowledge, Dalit women's struggles for education focuses on the experience of Dalit girls within schools. She argues that power relationships in the wider society have a strong bearing on both access to education and the quality of education that Dalit girls receive. Her study demonstrates that the Dalit students are made to sit separately in the classrooms and separate registers are maintained. Also, the girls reported that the teachers had a negative image and low expectations from them, and treatment in the school was humiliating. According to Chanana, studying the relation between gender and education requires interdisciplinary orientation. Both occupy the margins of sociology as an academic discipline. Both are softer options within the social sciences, and both are chosen first options of women as students and for employment. All these studies demonstrate that feminist scholarships have underscored gender inequalities in educational achievement and gendered character of the education system. However, scholars who have worked in the area of gender, caste and community do recognize that schools offer spaces that are less gender biased than the confines of family and community, hence provide an opportunity limited for girls to develop social relationships, a sense of confidence and to achieve in the non-traditional spheres, as argued by Nambisan. Theoretical framework. Till recently, structural functionalism has remained the dominant perspective in sociology of education. Functional analysis view of education tends to focus on the positive contribution made by education to the maintenance of the social system. They believe that the aim of education is to socialize. Although this aim is stated in formal curriculum, it is mainly achieved through the hidden curriculum, a subtler but powerful indoctrination of the norms and values of the wider society. Durkheim perceived education as a means of maintaining social solidarity. Parsons conceives education as an instrument to instill universalistic values, and Davis and Moore understand education as a means of role allocation. In India, until the mid-1980s, research by sociologists in education was largely informed by a liberal perspective within which quality of educational opportunity was a major concern. Marxist perspective explains how educational system is shaped by the economic infrastructure. According to this perspective, the educational system works as an instrument to produce the workforce required by the capitalist. The study by Gintis and Bowles, Paul Willis are some of the studies carried out in education using Marxist perspective. In the Indian context, Jairam and Kamath have studied education from Marxist perspective. However, studies that used macro-theoretical perspectives of functionalism and Marxism neglected learning context in the schools. The new sociology of education emerged in the United Kingdom in the 1970s as a critique of structural functional paradigm and the neglect of the study of schooling. Based on the theoretical perspectives of symbolic interactionism and phenomenology, it draws attention to the school realities as a socially constructed and forcefully highlighted the importance of interrogating school knowledge and taken for granted problems of educators. Peter Woods, David Hargreaves, Basil Bernstein are some of the key representatives of the new sociology of education. Brief history of women's education in India. Plausibly, there had been matriarchy during the pre-Vedic period, but when there was a shift from matriarchy to patriarchy, right of knowledge was gradually denied to women. Further, the gradual consolidation of patriarchy restricted women to the domestic sphere, and education became the privilege of the upper caste males. With the education had a highly religious character and had never had mass character. With the East India Company consolidating its power, they had refused to take upon itself the responsibility of education of the people of India. They did not want to interfere in the socio-religious life of the Indians so that they could consolidate their power without any opposition. With the advent of British, Indian men were increasingly exposed to English education and modern ideas. Social reformers in India like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Maharishi Karve started pressing for social reforms for women, and gradually doors were opened for women's education. However, intent was largely to train women in their own household responsibilities as ideal wives and ideal mothers, which remains same till large extent even today. Initially, there was strong opposition to women's education, and debates over women's education started taking place. Debates were largely on what type of education was suitable for women. Social reformers like Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Dayanand Saraswati, Lokmanya Tilak and others pressed for education which would help women to be a good householder and good mothers who would create next generation for the nation. Thus, they wanted education of women to uphold the patriarchal and traditional roles. However, Mahatma Phule, one of the radical social reformers, was of the opinion that men and women need to be given equal education and stressed that one should make women fully developed and confident individuals. He considered education to be an instrument of emancipation for all the suppressed and exploited. Thus, there were certain efforts in the area of women's education, and when India became free in 1951, 8.6% of the females were literate. In the post-independence period, recognizing education as the only panacea for social development, efforts were directed in that direction. Fundamental rights, directive principles, and the concurrent list in the Constitution of India guides government regarding education. Article 15, 39F, 42, 45 and 47 refers to education in India. Constitution of India largely perceives education as a means of social change and to gain equality in society. Special efforts were taken in the area of women's education and that of marginalized communities through various constitutional provisions, schemes and programs. Various commissions and committees were appointed on women's education in the post-independence period. Indian University Commission in 1948 perceived education to enable women to contribute in all walks of life and discusses various aspects of women's education. It was an all-male member committee, and the recommendations it put forth for women's education was largely to reinforce the traditional role in household. Secondary Higher Education Commission 52-53 insists on teaching home science to women. Further, the Committee on Women's Education recommended identical curriculum, establishment of training institutes for women teachers, facilities for adult education for women and others. Durgabai Deshmukh Committee of 1958 was a significant step in the area of women's education. Some of its recommendations were more funds for girl children, establishment of separate National Council for Women's Education, giving free uniform, textbook and other materials to students. Hansa Mehta Committee demanded equal curriculum for men and women. The committee recommended teaching of vocational courses and home science to both boys and girls. Girls' Education and Public Cooperation recommended hostels, efforts to bring married women teachers, compulsory education among others. Kothari Commission of 1964-66 asserted that women's role had gone beyond mere bearing and rearing of children. The Commission issued a mandate for comprehensive thinking on women's education at all levels. Towards Equality Report 1974, prepared by the committee appointed by the Education and Social Welfare Department to understand the status of women in India, gave recommendations in the area of education like same curriculum, preschool education, co-education, part-time education for girls, no ban for admission of girls and boys institutes, preschool education for all children, universalization of education from the age group 6 to 14, introduction of sex education, provision of mixed staff, provision of common rooms and separate toilets, hostel facilities for girls and many others. Apart from these government initiatives, there were a lot of efforts taken in the area of voluntary sector. Yet despite of all these efforts by the government and voluntary organization, lot remains to be done in the area of women's education today. In 1991, female literacy was just 39.42%. Though access has increased over the years, retention of girl child remains a major issue. Educational achievements and caste and class and region and religion are intertwined. It is increasingly being recognized that if concrete difference has to be made in women's status, then it is pertinent to address the gender issues in education. Factors affecting women's education. Patriarchal society. One of the significant reasons for the adverse condition of women's education is patriarchal male-dominated society. Bringing up daughters is largely conceived as watering someone else's garden, so parents don't think it is important to educate or spend on their daughters in any other way. Even today in many families across India, there are practices of serving daughter with tea made of water, while milk added tea for the son, feeding son and daughter with the leftover food. Daughter sweeps, cleans, washes, feeds, works on the fields, fetches water while handling innumerable other domestic responsibilities, while a son has a luxury to study. Of course, many times a daughter is sent to a government Marathi medium schools, while a son is sent to a private English medium schools, which are largely known for quality education. If a son is not performing well in studies, extra efforts are taken to ensure, like sending him for tuitions. Now a daughter is bright in studies, it is made to discontinue education for reasons like finance, spoiling chances of getting good grooms and lack of educational facilities in the village. The education of girl child by the family and policy makers has largely been justified in the interest of supplementary income generation, lower fertility rates and population control, better mothering skills, upholding tradition and spiritual values, and improving social cohesion. Most of these interests address women as instruments for the upkeep of family society, effacing their very identity and rights as individual beings. Central paradox here is that education, which has been a site for reproduction of social values and stereotypes which blind and constrain, is also potentially a site for empowerment. Gender bias syllabus. Unfortunately, education remains an important instrument to instill patriarchal values among the citizens of the country. Whereas studies on the analysis of school textbook and other aspects demonstrate that books and practices in school instill patriarchal values among the students. Textbooks still carry pictures like mother working in the kitchen, daughter sweeping floor, father reading newspaper, younger brother playing with toys. Textbook carries sentences which reinforce gendered roles like Sharad bring vegetable, Kamla cut vegetable, Abhay studies, Sita worship God. The Indian Institute of Education did a study of Marathi textbook of the past 3 decades in 2003. The linkages between the gender and curriculum are complex and challenging. School textbooks are a crucial component in the acquisition of knowledge, and unless syllabi are revised to incorporate a gendered perspective along with other marginalized perspectives, schooling will reproduce the narrow biases and the narrow basis of mainstream social science knowledge. It is important to recognize that regardless of all the work produced by feminist scholars, unless a gender perspective is incorporated in the syllabi, each generation of children will absorb the biases of existing ways of understanding society and reproduce these ways of thinking into the future. Retention. One of the major challenges facing a girl child education is the challenge of retaining them in the education system. The National Sample Survey Organization data reports that almost 47% of the children who drop out of school cite inability to cope academically and lack of interest in studies as the predominant reasons. The dropout rates of girls, especially for the marginalized sections of society and the rural areas, continues to be grim. 9 out of every 10 girls enrolled in school do not complete schooling, and only 1 out of every 100 girls enrolled in class 1 reaches class 12 in rural areas, NCERT study of 2006. Factors cited for dropout include poor teaching, non-comprehension, difficulties in coping, high cost of private tuition or education. Despite the education system's focused efforts to include girls, it continues to push out those who are already within. Clearly, issues of curriculum and pedagogy require equal and critical attention in addition to enrollment. National level surveys and data also show that 9 out of every 10 girls ever enrolled in school could not complete schooling. Only 1 out of every 100 girls enrolled in class 1 reaches class 12 in rural areas, and 14 out of every 100 girls enrolled in class 1 reach class 12 in urban areas. While the cost of education is a reason for poorer children not enrolling or dropping out of school, studies show that school factors are also responsible. One of the major reasons why children, both boys and girls, in rural and urban areas drop out is lack of interest in studies, hostile environments, poor teaching, non-comprehension, and difficulties of coping. Poverty. Data increasingly demonstrates that the school system is betraying the poor. Domestic responsibilities and widespread perception of girls merely as future homemakers contribute to the problem, and girls get short shrift when the cost of education magnifies. They are withdrawn from school. Therefore, the government and voluntary organizations are taking efforts to include girls in the education system. The system itself pushes the girl out, and those girls within the system too do not benefit much because of the gender-blind curriculum and pedagogy issues. Privatization of education. In the changing context of globalization and neoliberalism, there is increasing privatization of education right since the preschool to higher education level. Privatization has increased the cost of education and thus throws girls, marginalized communities out of mainstream education. These policies are bound to exacerbate gender discrimination in the area of education, in part because many countries' parents favor the education of boys over girls. Research is increasingly demonstrating that privatization of education need not guarantee quality education. As Manjarekar observes, the devaluation of government schooling over the past 20 years or so has been speeded up by market reforms since the early 1990s. Data from the urban areas shows that corporations and government schools now mainly have poor girls and very poor children from the other marginal communities. In many cities, municipal schools with good infrastructure are lying vacant. Secondary education has received very little research attention in relation to access to school, experiences of students, and educational outcomes. Abraham, in a study of stratified sample of government secondary school alumni and their parents in the city of Mumbai in 2003, points out the fact that at the secondary stage, state-aided but privately managed schools have expanded over the decades, while government schools have declined. She argues that by curtailing direct investment in the schooling of the poor and indirectly subsidizing private schooling of the middle classes, the state deprives the poor of schooling and contributes to the reproduction of social inequalities through schooling. Thus, today the state schools are largely dominated by children of the poor, belonging mainly to the lower caste and minorities. This trend has been particularly pronounced in the 1990s, the period when the policies of liberalization were implemented, which led to the downsizing of public sector and the coming of the new economy and insecure futures. In the conclusion of the module, Gender in Education, to take a stock of what we have done in this whole module, we have understood how gender is a significant aspect of education. Further, we have also briefly looked at the history of women's education in India. Further, looking at the various factors that are affecting women's education, we have majorly focused on the whole processes of globalization, especially in the context of privatization of education and the challenges it has put for government schools in order to understand how it has dealt with the policy of women's education in India within the whole neoliberal policies of the government.